Well, the White House has just released an internal after-action review, of what they call it, of the administration's chaotic withdrawal, you remember, from Afghanistan.
Well, the majority of this review is classified. It will only be shared with members of Congress. And in announcing the review, the White House also defended President Biden's decision to end America's longest war. And it also put much of the blame on former President Trump.
While it was always the president's intent to end that war, it is also undeniable that decisions made and the lack of planning done by the previous administration significantly limited options available to him.
Major news, so much to get into, and the best person to talk to about this right now, senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who took John Kirby there to task, we saw in the press briefing room after just being handed that report on this holiday, the lead up to this holiday weekend. Tell us, Ed, just your top line from the very beginning, the biggest takeaways from looking at this.
This is a 12-page, watered down, neutered, cleansing of what is two otherwise classified, far more detailed, lengthy after-action reviews done by the Pentagon and by the State Department that will not be released to the public because they are classified. They will instead be sent to Congress for their review, and inevitably lawmakers may share details of them, however they want to do that. But the White House will not be releasing this. They went to great lengths to point out that this was a voluntary thing. Look, if they hadn't done it, Congress was going to do it for them. So they clearly tried to get out ahead of this, knowing that whether it was Democrats or Republicans, there was going to be scrutiny of how the withdrawal went. And from the second paragraph, actually from the first paragraph, but I'll read from the second paragraph, as you said, the president and this report spends the first 3.5 pages excoriating the previous administration for leaving such a mess for them to clean up. President Biden's choices for how to execute a withdrawal from Afghanistan were severely constrained by conditions created by his predecessor. When President Trump took office in 2017, there were more than 10,000 troops in Afghanistan. 18 months later, after introducing more than 3,000 additional troops just to maintain the stalemate, President Trump ordered direct talks with the Taliban without consulting with our allies and partners or allowing the Afghan government at the negotiating table. It goes on to say that they left the Biden administration with no real details during that transition. Remember, when Biden transition officials were blocked from entering departments and agencies from a better understanding of what was going on. And in essence, that's why it was so chaotic. But it ends with a pretty telling quote. Ultimately, after more than 20 years, more than $2 trillion, and standing up an Afghan army of 300,000 soldiers, the speed and ease with which the Taliban took control of Afghanistan suggests that there was no scenario except a permanent and significantly expanded U.S. military presence that would have changed the trajectory. A damning assessment of 20 years of U.S. military engagement in Afghanistan, but a reflection of the belief by this president that it was time to withdraw. And we should point out, a majority of Americans, that it was time to withdraw from Afghanistan, even if the withdrawal itself was messy and, of course, deadly, leading to the deaths of those 13 U.S. service members and others who were caught up in the melee there at the airport and with some of the evacuations. What's telling is that this, we are led to believe, has been ready for weeks, if not months. Versions of this have been to the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. They have then been passed up to the National Security Council, which in essence serves as the super desk for all things international or foreign relations in the administration. And they're the ones that wrote this watered-down public report, if we want to call it that. And they're releasing it here on the Thursday before a holiday weekend in the midst of the Catholic and Jewish and high holidays, when the president literally was leaving the White House as the report was released, and when reporters were given just 10 minutes heads up before they came out for that briefing, which meant that we weren't necessarily able to give it the fullest review that would lead to better questions. And now the State Department and Pentagon press corps at least won't have a chance to ask people in public about this until next week. Fine, that's their decision. The other thing is that Congress isn't in session, and they're the ones that have been asking for this. In fact, the leading Republican critic of the administration's response to this and the crafting of this report, who's been asking for details, Chairman Michael McCall, is in Taiwan today, may have very well been sleeping when this was released, so he's not immediately available for comment. It's the definition of a news dump, and it is, for now at least, the Biden administration's assessment of what went on and their belief that while it may have been not necessarily as organized as they could have hoped, it ultimately fulfilled the mission to withdraw U.S. forces and to fulfill the president's campaign promise and goal of ending the conflict in Afghanistan.
It's fascinating, Ed, because what's missing from everything you've just laid out, and as you noted, what's missing from this so-called report is any acknowledgement from the Biden administration that things could have been done better, they could have been planned more efficiently, and in fact, the administration had the capacity to do so. Let's not forget, for viewers, it was absolute chaos in Kabul at the airport. You know, those pilots were forced to take off with people running on the runway, grabbing onto the aircraft, and not to mention the thousands or hundreds at least of translators and people who helped the U.S. mission for 2 decades, who were completely blindsided and left behind, many of them still left behind today. No acknowledgement from the administration that, yeah, they could have done things better, and that's not mentioning all the U.S. servicemen and women who risked their lives for this mission.
Right, and in fact, to that point, Errol, we did a word search on the electronic versions of this for the word like mistake or apologize or sorry, just to see if there's any sense of that. There is one. To counter the perceived immediate threat of the possibility of greater threats to the United States, it said in this report, the U.S. military launched a drone strike in Kabul that mistakenly killed 10 civilians. You'll remember that incident that happened that was in that very dense part of Kabul where they ultimately realized they killed the wrong people. Among the causes of this tragic error was that the high-risk and dynamic threat environment led the team to inaccurately assess that the target posed an imminent threat to those on the ground. It also says here, the president received and accepted the unanimous advice of his top national security officials. We know at least the U.S. Central Commander, General McKenzie, had told Face the Nation last fall he didn't necessarily agree with all this. We asked who exactly, or how do you define top national security official? Was it people just in the room with the president here in Washington, or was it the others across the government who were advising him? We wouldn't get a straight answer out of it. So that gives you the sense of the kind of maybe things that were left out of this report. They also would point out, and we should contextually know, while we saw the footage of those tragic incidents there at the airport with people who got stuck in the landing gear of the aircraft or were clinging for dear life to take off with those aircraft, they would point out hundreds, if not thousands, of missions successfully completed that brought out hundreds of thousands of people in an operation that was not anticipated and stood up pretty quickly amid the ongoing violence outside the airport. Yeah. But, you know, to that end, 13 U.S. service members killed, as you said, thousands of people potentially left behind or not yet still in the United States, despite longstanding assurances that they would be able to get here.
I'm going to let you go, Ed, but John did say he would make himself, or Mr. Kirby said he'd make himself available to you after the briefing. Confirmed, denied, did it happen? Did he give you some time for extra questions?
Well, I came to see you first, but we have a series of follow-up questions we'll be emailing on behalf of our colleagues who've been reading it regarding the scope of the report. And we look forward to hearing from lawmakers about what they make of this and whether they decide to share more details from the 2 specific reports done by the Pentagon and the State Department. And if we ever hear from the president, for that matter. He has left for the weekend to go to Camp David to celebrate the Easter holiday with his family there. We are not scheduled to see him in public again until Monday, when he's back here for the Easter egg roll and before he goes to Ireland on Tuesday. We'll see if we ever hear from him more about what critics and supporters of this White House agree was arguably the darkest day and one of the most chaotic decisions made by this White House so far in its tenure, the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Well, Ed O'Keefe, appreciate you coming straight out to us and appreciate even more you continuing to make sure you get answers. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed.
Take care.